Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this evening. I've got a great guest that I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation, kind of go into some different places than normal. So I think you'll enjoy it. My guest this evening is Will Witt. He's an author and he's a host over on PragerU. Will, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, man, glad to be here. Glad to have the video on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's great because I don't often get to have conversations with people sometimes who are in more of a, mainstream conservative outlet, and PragerU is certainly one that made big waves when it started doing its content online. And so I was really excited to get to talk to you. But I always start off when I'm talking to people by asking the same question: how did you get started in this? How did you end up, kind of in this role?
Yeah, I mean, it really started with, from a basic perspective, it started with understanding that you've been lied to your entire life. There are people out there who are lying and telling you all sorts of nonsense and jargon. And when you find out that you've been told all these lies your entire life, you wake up, and I felt very compelled to go and speak truth or just speak difference of opinion essentially to what I've been hearing. And so I grew up in Colorado, and I grew up there my whole life and was a liberal and an atheist that entire time. And then I went to college to CU Boulder. And if you know anything about CU, I mean, we call it the People's Republic of Boulder. And most people go to school as their parents taught them conservative values, and then they go to college and they become a leftist. Maybe they dye their hair blue, whatever. I was the opposite. I became a conservative when I was in those sociology classes, the anti-capitalism stuff, the white privilege stuff. And so, long story short, I started getting super involved in all sorts of different things, whether that was conservative student groups of the Republican Party in Colorado, and then eventually PragerU. I found out about PragerU and their student program and actually made a video for them. I taught myself how to shoot the video, edit the video, all that stuff, sent it to them, and they ended up loving it and offering me a job. And so after 2 years of school, moved out of Colorado, moved to Los Angeles, and doing what I do now. And so that was about 4 years ago. I moved out to Los Angeles.
Yeah, so you're the one person who did the opposite journey in college, but you started with a lot of kind of man on the street interviews with PragerU, and you're kind of in a different role now. How did you kind of evolve that style into more what you're doing today?
That's such a good question because there are definitely people who will see me and still say like, "Oh, you're like the Jesse Waters guy," and I'm like, "Please don't call me that." I'm like, I want to the man on the street stuff. I love doing the man on the street because I love talking to people, and the reason why I like doing that is because the way that I do it, I think, is different than a lot of other people, where I just go and ask people questions. I'm trying to change people's minds. I'm trying to at least open them up to a different possibility, not just make, hey, here's conservative red meat content. It's like I actually want to talk to people. And so essentially, I took a lot of those skills that I learned through doing that, and now I've evolved into more of the things that I'm doing now. So whether that's with my show, whether that's writing books, whether that's producing documentaries, stuff that I'm doing now, or going and giving speeches, I've been able to take a lot of those skills of saying, hey, here's what these people actually think. I'm not just strawmanning people, or here's how you can actually have good conversations with people, and using those things that I've learned to actually put them out to more people. You get to a point where it's like, okay, you've evolved enough and learned enough and been well read enough that you can start to do more than just ask other people questions. You can tell other people how they can have conversations too.
Yeah, and that's obviously a big part of the book. And for anybody who doesn't follow Will or hasn't, seen his book out there, I've got links to both his Twitter and the book below. But it's How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies. Uh, I'm guessing that a lot of your experience from kind of the man on the street stuff went into this book. Can you tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, essentially, it's like there's 17 different chapters within the book, and each one is about a different political or cultural topic. So there's one on racism, there's one on climate change, there's one on police brutality, all these different issues, right? Freedom of speech, illegal immigration, and essentially breaks down, here's the biggest arguments that the left will give you, and then how you actually beat those arguments. And not just how you beat them, it's how you actually have questions and persuasion tactics and strategies to talk to people about it. Because I feel like there's so much noise out there that's like, hey, here's why the left sucks. And I get that. I get why people say those things, but I actually want to give people the tools that they can use to actually have good conversations, and also telling people that when you're talking to people from a different point of view, you have to, first of all, in a lot of ways, be compassionate in some ways, because if this is like an individual, you don't want to be rude to this person. And secondly, be humble when you're talking to this person as well, because you don't know everything, right? We live in this world where people think that they know everything. They confuse knowledge for truth, when in reality, you can learn so much and so many different things just by talking to people. So I really wanted to give people the strategies that they can use, and it's not just me talking out of my butt doing this stuff. Again, like these are the things that I've learned actually using these strategies and questions for each topic that other people can use. And I wanted to share that with people. So that's really what the book is all about.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting time for that kind of book to come out because in some ways, obviously, like that's very necessary, especially in those one-on-one conversations. That I think that's if if minds are going to get changed, that's really where it's going to happen. In another way, it feels like we're almost further away from the ability to do that on the large scale, have those topics and conversations really be fruitful, kind of as a nation, as a people, than we've ever been. It feels more and more like there was that explosion of Ben Shapiro owns videos, right? And
Right.
he's on there and destroying the college kids with facts and logic, and that certainly gets you some people, right? There's some people who walk into that and they see that and they say, oh wow, okay, like they just have all the answers, the other people don't. I'm on that team. But at the same time, we almost see more and more people just rejecting that, right? It becomes harder and harder to reach people. They seem to be more and more willing to calcify their positions. Facts and logic aren't really the issue of the day. It's almost more tribal, base. Do you feel there's a way that that can be applied to the general discussion, or do you feel like the book really is more of a one-on-one thing?
No, I mean you're exactly right. I mean, I think that kind of facts and logic owned lib compilation, excuse me, has kind of been taken on the helm of a lot of people who are coming up as new conservative types of people. And they will go out there and they will sacrifice having good conversations or sacrifice friendships and things like that just to own the libs in a sense. And it's like, listen, I am in a large sense, it's like compassion in the micro, but passion in the macro. That's kind of been my philosophy. It's like if you are having individual conversations with someone and you think that this person, can have a net good impact on the world, you want to be compassionate to this person, unless this person's evil, it's different. But so many of these people are just confused or they don't have the right information or anything. You want to be compassionate to these people. But when looking at a larger scale, when you're talking to groups of people, if I'm giving a speech or going out and talking to all sorts of people, it is about being passionate and unrelenting in your views and ideas. And so some of the strategies and things that I talk about within the book still persist when talking to large groups or about, larger groups of people. But, my book is really focused on the individual and how individualism in a lot of ways is what has been lost. People focus way too much on what other people think about them. They focus on what the herd thinks, as Nietzsche would call herd morality. Like that is really where we're at. And so I think that if we remain strong in the macro and understand that individuals can be changed through grassroots and compassion, I think we can do a lot of good there.
Now, one thing that I think has been really useful, and I won't beat around the bush.
Right.
You've seen me on Twitter, so you know that I'm not always kind to some elements of mainstream conservatism,
Right.
and but
No,
I
that's
have
why I like
seen.
you.
I appreciate that. And I was very surprised when I got the follow, but it's very heartwarming to see some. It's very encouraging to see some people from mainstream conservatism kind of take on some of those criticisms or some of that and start to work into a different areas. You see people from the Claremont Institute, you see guys like Chris Rufo, you see people starting to change tactics and kind of be willing to address issues and move off of what feel kind of like stale talking points that we see so much of in mainstream conservatism. I think probably the best example, and you and I talked a little bit about this on Twitter, but the biggest example would be the Virginia race, right? You saw the power of the focus on CRT. You saw what Rufo was able to achieve, and really one of the few people who has been very successful in that kind of activism, focusing on critical race theory and what it, who it's targeting, and then you immediately saw the Republican Party, like mainstream Republican accounts, saying things like socialism lost in Virginia. And like, I don't like socialism either, but socialism clearly wasn't what was on the menu
Right.
in Virginia. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the transformations that are happening with some of the more mainstream outlets and different people who are looking at these issues?
Yeah. I can't say that the transformations are happening everywhere, and I can say that it's pretty slow. Like I'm sure that, a lot of the people who follow you too. I mean, I put out something and like I put out this tweet maybe about 2 weeks ago, right? And it was about, I think it was Zero Hedge. They put it out about how the income inequality is worse now than like ever before, essentially, right? And I put a tweet, like tweet quoted it, and I said, no Republican in Congress seems to care about this at all. Right. And this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. And then I have people who are conservative in my replies calling me a leftist, just because I care about this. And so I don't think that the transformation is happening in a way where we really see like, oh, all these people are waking up. But I do think it's happening in incremental ways. Like people like Pedro Gonzalez, like stuff that he puts out there and stuff that I think you're putting out there. And, it's easy for me in a sense to get very easily pigeonholed in these kind of mainstream conservative stuff where like the GOP does put that out there and say socialism lost, and it's like people are going to expect me to say the exact same thing. And I think that before I would be someone like that to do those kinds of things, but I think that it's just a lack of depth from a lot of people on the right. I mean, obviously lack of depth from people on the left, but a lot of lack of depth from people on the right where there are approved things that conservatism has said you can say, right? You go on conservative Twitter and let's say something happens, a mass shooting or whatever it is, some event or a racist thing, whatever it is, you will see everyone basically say it's the same variation about that. There are a few who are very brave. I would say Matt Walsh is another one who has really grown on me recently. He says awesome things, among some others. And it's like, but for the most part, they're just like things that you are supposed to say in this line of work. And for me, I mean, I was doing that, and I look back and I'm like, I was doing that. And now it's like when you see just how evil and corrupt the world is and how evil and corrupt both political parties are, it's like, you really have no choice but to just say what you actually believe.
Well, you certainly have a choice to do otherwise, but I'm glad when I see people choose the right way. And I think you're right that Matt Walsh is another one that has really stepped out. I was surprised to see he did a tweet, I think yesterday or the day before, about, rights are really overblown and really we need to talk more about responsibilities and virtue. And
Right.
that's something that you just would not have heard 10 years ago. That would have been,
Hmm.
that, like you said, people going after major corporations. You just would not have seen people who are relatively mainstream, conservatives, who swim in those waters, wouldn't have been willing to kind of take aim at some of that stuff. And so it is absolutely encouraging to see people make that shift. One thing I am always worried about is, I feel like you said, because there is, so much of those talking points are stale. There are so many approved things. It feels like there's a very safe box within which mainstream conservatism has been allowed to exist. And as long as you don't touch the sides, you're okay. But you see people like Tucker Carlson, be able to go out there, Pedro Gonzalez out there, being able to just say things that you wouldn't have heard 10 years ago, like CRT is anti-white. Like it's
Hmm.
attacking people based on the color of their skin. And if those people are white, it's okay to say so. And I think it's it's interesting. It's encouraging. Do you think, I know, like you said, that those changes are happening slowly and in pieces. It's not everyone, it's not everywhere. But do you think that that is something that is going to grow in the movement? Do you think that that's something's going to split conservatism? Do you think that there's a realignment? Like, I know it's all staring into a crystal ball here, but
Right.
do you see opportunities there for the conservative movement to grow and change, or do you think it has to become something else?
Yeah, I think it does have to become something else. I see a split already happening. I mean, when you have some of the top people who you kind of just listed off, like saying things about the GOP establishment and saying that these people are all hacks, the people like you have people in the GOP who are taking money from Google. They say that they're standing up for our First Amendment rights and they love the Constitution, and then they take money from Google. PragerU is suing YouTube for restricting our videos, right? It's like these people are the enemy. You're taking money from the enemy. So when you have such a stark difference between these sides, even within one side, like there's no way for it to stay together. I just don't see it happening in a way that's going to be conducive to a good political aim in the future. Like there's more unity between left-wing populism and right-wing populism than there is between someone like me and Mitch McConnell, or some of these other people who are these conservative types. So I think that as kind of this alternative conservatism has grown, or at least I guess I don't really know if that's the word for it, but you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? This like
yeah,
different
yeah.
this difference of opinion, as that grows, kind of the corporate conservatism also has to grow to outweigh that. You know, so it's like they both grow at the same time, furthering the divide.
Yeah, it's interesting to see because obviously you've got some of the most establishment guys just jumped ship when it was never Trump, right? You saw a lot.
Mhm.
That was kind of the first shedding of people who were basically already on their way to the left, or were so comfortable managing the right as opposed to leading it, that they, as soon as there was any pushback, they kind of moved over. And I think you're starting to see the second wave of that. I think, like you said, there, the I don't always know about the alliance between the populist left and right. I've hoped that that was something that could happen, but I'm not
Right.
sure if that's
There's always
always the
differences
case.
there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real. I feel like it's really just that core fundamental understanding of human nature makes it a bridge. It's almost, I've had conversations with these people. I've been on their podcasts. I'm friends with many of them, but oftentimes it's very difficult to make that final journey, because they, at the end of the day, they just don't have the same values you do. Even if you have the same enemies for the moment, it's hard to make that journey. But I think that it is interesting that we're seeing that second wave, and like you said, just kind of that rise of, I hesitate to even call it populist, because it is populist, but it's also something else. It's the willingness
Yeah.
to, I think, be focused on families and common good, and rather than just chanting freedom every time. That was always
Yeah.
the
Right.
common conservative line, was just freedom, freedom. We'll fight for freedom, and that always felt safe, because as long as you could talk about freedom of the individual, you didn't have to commit to an issue. You didn't have to say anything
Right.
that could get you in trouble.
It's
Do
more like
you?
a return to traditionalism in a
That's
lot
right.
of ways.
Yeah. Do you see that? Do you see? Um, how do you think it would be best, if you could shift certain things about the GOP or mainstream conservatism? What would you target and focus on to bring it more in line with something that you think might be more traditional or beneficial for kind of the average middle class American?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do because I just like, first of all, hate the, maybe this will sound like a leftist, but I mean, I hate the labels on everything. You sound like some punk kid, but it's like, Herbert talks about ciphers, where ciphers are essentially people who, instead of thinking freely, they are a part of a political party or a political group. And then once they are a part of that political group, they are so entrenched in it and they're worried about not being a part of that group that they're not going to think for themselves. They're not going to think freely. So, even like, this is just human nature. Like however much we want to change conservatism and say, oh, this is the new conservatism, then that almost becomes like there comes a time when eventually that will probably be corporatized. Like the MAGA movement started out as like a very kind of grassroots underground thing that like the modern, I guess you can use the word populist again, movement started out as. That was like the normal hardworking class American. And now the MAGA movement has been in so many ways hijacked. It's been hijacked by the corporatists and the GOP rhinos. It's been hijacked. It's no longer what it was. And so, there's always a fear that the things that we're saying right now are going to be hijacked by people when they understand that this is actually, oh, the new popular thing to do. Right. So it's hard to even have those like labels on it. But when it comes to what I think that it needs to be focused on, I mean, it seems obvious that the number one thing is family. I mean, bringing family values are, of course, the number one thing. That is, first of all, bringing school choice. That is abolishing the teachers union. I'm actually of the group that I know is somewhat unpopular, but I say abolish the public schools. I know that's kind of out there, but I really think that would probably be best for this country. I think that if you can have children who are growing up in, first of all, good homes where parents aren't getting divorced so much, and actually, they need to stay together, and then the education systems are monitored by parents, and they can actually see what their children are learning, and it's not just leftist indoctrination, and they can have more freedom of choice in choosing what school they want to send their kids to. I think you can do a lot of good, because it doesn't really matter what a conservative president or conservative news media, none of that matters if the children are just indoctrinated or taught this CRT or gender stuff, and the next generation just comes out spoiled like a rotten apple again.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I think that's why CRT felt like a kind of a fire break. It felt like you finally had something that reignited that populist energy in a way that hadn't done it since Trump, when it came around. And that was certainly nice to see, because once parents really understood what was going on in their schools, you really saw that energy. And I guess in many ways, I'm rooting for the anti-CRT movement. I'm rooting for Rufo. I think that he's a good actor. I think it's an important issue, and obviously, the fact that it's energized people in a way that we haven't seen in a long time is crucial. At the same time, I think a lot of people, some of the parents waking up to this, don't understand that CRT has been in your kid's school. It's been in school for decades, right?
Right.
This is a final name. They finally kind of solidified it and named it because they felt confident enough to do that. But this is something that your children have been taught this stuff since they were in kindergarten, and so were you, frankly. And
Right.
so it's going to be difficult to just kind of root that out. Now, obviously, if we could do what you're talking about, which I wholeheartedly agree with, which is just scrap the public school system, I think it's beyond saving.
Yeah, agree.
But for those that are attempting to do that, I certainly wish them the best. Do you? I guess this comes then to my next question about issues of conservatives or people on the right, or however we want to label ourselves, opposing progressivism. What steps do you think they can take? Because I think in many ways, people look at the political system, they look at the last election. Many people, myself included, feel like it was fortified pretty heavily. We look at the inability of even people when they do get into office to make changes due
Yep.
to the inability of Republicans or conservatives to use the same levers of power that Democrats can when they're in office. I mean, you look a great example. We just see Joe Biden, right? He's in office. He issues this, OSHA order through the Labor Department to do the mandate. The courts say put it on hold, and he says no, just do it anyway, right? He doesn't
Hmm.
care about the courts. It doesn't matter to him. Most businesses will probably comply just on that alone, and the news media isn't going to hold him accountable. Trump can't get an executive order through to do literally anything, and that's an actual like constitutional ability he has.
Hmm.
What can people who oppose progressivism do when they look at that kind of power imbalance?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really tough question for sure. And I struggle with this daily because I do these speeches and stuff where, like I just finished a whole book tour where I went around for a month and spoke at all these different colleges and different places, trying to inspire people. And, I think that first of all, it starts with the local places like in Los Angeles. The reason why we now have vax mandates for going into restaurants and all this kind of nonsense, horrible things is because of the LA City Council. And I think LA is a lost cause, so maybe that's not the best example, but a lot of places where people live who are probably listening to this right now are not lost causes. Like I'll go out and talk to people on the streets and they'll be like someone will come up to me, right? And I'll go into a restaurant and they say, "Hey, I need to see your vaccine or your vaccine card." I'm like, "What? Like, what do you mean?" And then, I get mad and then I leave and I go sit outside. And then the person comes up to me afterwards and they say, "Hey, I'm on your side. This is crazy. Like, I totally agree with you. This sucks." And I'm like, "Well, you're obviously not on my side, because if you were on my side, you would go and not enforce this. You would tell me that you don't need to see my vax card, right?" And so I think that people kind of sometimes look for these like grandiose solutions on things when in reality you need to look at yourself and say, "What am I actually doing to stand up for the things that I actually believe in?" Right? Like, how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice until you are no longer someone who stands up for truth? And I get that this is somewhat philosophical and not a concrete answer, but I think that people a lot of the time want something that's like, just like here, a quick, get rich quick kind of scheme like that. But it really takes like getting your house in order, as Jordan Peterson says, before you criticize the world. And people will lie to themselves and they'll lie about the world and all these things, and then and think that they're trying to save something or do something, when in reality, like so many of these choices, so many of these things that happen in America are up to us. They happen through us as individuals who say every single day whether or not we are going to choose to do the morally right thing or the easy lie. And we do that every single day. And that really is the bottom line of it. What type of person are you going to be? Are you going to be the person that sacrifices the things you believe to be true to appease other people? Or are you going to be the person who stands up and glorifies God and believes in truth to the best of your ability?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. You have to, and especially if you want to build a generation that can lead, right? If you're frustrated with the current leadership, you're frustrated about where the mainstream politics is going, you have to make yourself worthy, right? You have to live a life that other people respect. You have to be able to walk the talk before other people are going to follow you. So I think that's always good individual advice. People sometimes in my circles will give Jordan Peterson problems, but as someone who went some pretty difficult personal adversity, I can say Jordan Peterson and kind of helped me a lot in that area, and I
Yeah,
think that
same
that's good.
here. Yeah, same.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful advice for the individual. At the same time, while I think it's great advice for the individual, I think it's very lacking when we attempt to apply that to the collective. And I'm not saying that's what you were trying to
Right,
do, but I do see a
right.
lot of people try to do that, right? That's often the Republican or the GOP, just bootstrap yourself, right? Just pull yourself up by
Yeah.
your bootstraps, just figure it out and
Yeah.
fix it,
Well, I definitely don't believe it's the bootstraps on the ground. I mean, that, or, just picking yourself up, because for many young people right now in America, that is nearly impossible in some ways. Like wages have been the same since the 1980s, and that is partly because of illegal immigration, partly because of the corporate lobbying and the regulations that they put into place. Like the opportunities that your parents and grandparents had are just not there for you as a young person getting out of college, especially with how much debt you have, how much more expensive things have gotten, college, healthcare, housing, way up past inflation rates. So yeah, that pick yourself up by the bootstraps is a tired thing. I guess I was more referring to just people being, understanding what truth is, and not sacrificing that, is that is really your most important tenet in life. And if you can focus on that and apply that to different things that are coming up within your life, you kind of have to take it on a case by case basis in a sense when it comes
know.
to that.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, I knew that's not what it's not where you're going, but I
Yeah,
just say that's
yeah.
an argument you hear a lot. It's a default, and it's really difficult because I mean another great example just happened. Looking at today's events, look at the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Like, look what's going on with that. You see someone who did take it upon himself to defend people, to give aid to people who are in need when his government failed, when other men in his community were not standing up and protecting themselves and their community and their families. He was there, and look what he's going through because of this, right? Like, it is so very clear to me, you may have your own opinions on this, but it's so very clear to me that this individual is not only innocent but very heroic.
That's
And the
exactly what I
fact
said. Yeah, same.
Yeah, and the fact that the media is taking a trial that is basically a clown show. It's showing at every level that Rittenhouse was innocent. The defense's own, or the prosecution's own witnesses are admitting that he's innocent on the stand, and all the media can say is he's some white supremacist who went to shoot a bunch of people, in Kenosha that were also white. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like, when you see someone facing that kind of adversity for doing the right thing, obviously, like, that's what has to happen. It's on some level, but it makes it very difficult for people, right? It makes it very difficult for individuals to stand up. He's being made an example of for a reason, right?
I mean, that's exactly right. Of course, he's going to be made an example of. He committed the unforgivable sin of being white. I mean, that is really what he is on trial for right now with all of this. He's just he want that this shooting and everything is going to be the scapegoat for white supremacy. It's like that tweet that I think Jack Poso dug up from Joe Biden about Rittenhouse and saying, white supremacy is no home in America if I'm elected or something. And it was the picture of Kyle, and it's like, this is what it's really all about, But he is being made an example of. But people have to understand that is what life is all about. Life is about suffering to achieve something great. If you're never putting yourself out there to do something indistinguishable from other people and doing something brave and passionate, articulate, like all these things, and you will not have a great life. You will have a mediocre life. This is why we're in the situation that we're in right now in America, because the majority of people who are about my age would rather give up their safety or give up their freedom for a little bit of safety. I mean, that is really what we are at. They want to be safe, they want to be comfortable, and they don't want to have to ever go outside the box. And Kyle Rittenhouse, being this brave, this hero, he was going and giving first aid to people. I mean, he was doing all the right things, and so made an example of by these leftist people. I mean, what we have to do is show them that there are actually more of us than they think. If we can show them through, first of all, buying things that we don't agree with. If Coca-Cola comes out and says, try to be less white in their staff trainings, why the hell are you still buying Coca-Cola? It makes no sense to me. Or any of these other companies that are putting out woke or things that are against your values. You should not be supporting them. That's the way that we change it. And secondly, it's about showing them that there are a ton of us out there, making our voices heard. These people will go back on the things that they say if we actually go out there and show them that we care. It's like with the things with the airline pilots and all these other things. Like, if people come out and say what they really believe and make a big enough stink about it, I think we can make changes. Now, there's some, obviously complications when it comes to the airlines, because they'll just get bailed out anyway. So, there's deeper stuff there. But in just a general sense, I think we need to be more vocal in all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and I think the airline strike is another great example of a win, right? It's just them, saying, nope, and at the end of the day, how are you going to make this run without us? Just
Yeah.
being willing to put yourself out there. And I think you're right. Looking at Rittenhouse, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, too dangerous, shouldn't be there, shouldn't take that risk." But like you said, if people aren't willing to take those risks, then nothing changes, nothing happens. And you're right that we got here because too many people played it too safe for too long, and that eventually has some serious consequences. So I think that's an excellent point. I know that you had some limited time at about a half an hour, so I don't want to keep you too long. Um,
We could probably do a couple more. Yeah, sorry, I think they're running a little bit behind. So if you want to keep going for 10 more minutes, I think we're good.
okay, okay. I just didn't want to keep you too long if you had to get out of here.
No, yeah,
Um,
sorry about that, man.
oh, no problem, no problem. I'm thankful for the time I got. So now I have to think of what I was going to do that time. Sorry.
Yeah. We could just stare at the camera. I mean,
No,
that's always very
that makes
fun.
good sense. Yeah, a little more
Yeah,
awkward for you than me, maybe, but yeah, no,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
that's okay. Done it before.
Absolutely. So if you think that shift is occurring, obviously we see some alternative institutions starting to form, right? We start seeing some things outside of the system. Uh, there's the new university that they're forming in Austin with some of the, I guess, some of the IDW guys and some other
Hmm.
people. Now they tend to be more centrist. I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't put, someone was declaring Steven Pinker as a
Yeah, I
conservative
saw that.
thought leader. So obviously the definition of conservative is still up in the air there for the
Yeah,
media.
exactly.
But again, we do see people at the Claremont Institute. We do see, I think, publications like the American Mind and others like that moving conservative thought in different directions. Do you think that there is a space for new institutions that can kind of run alongside some of these things that are failing in our civilization, some of these universities, public education, think tanks, those kind of things? Do you think that there's a space for that? Because one of the things, like you said, I get very concerned about is that co-opting, right? The MAGA movement and getting co-opted by the much more corporate, kind of talking points version of the GOP. Do you think there's a way to build those institutions and still safeguard them from that? Or are those the only people with the money and the influence to get these things off the ground? Is there any way to solve that problem?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it right there with the money and the influence, man. I hate to be a downer, but it seems like that is really the way. I can say that in small instances, you can definitely make these things happen. Like, I work with this school, this charter school down in Orange County. I'm over in Los Angeles, if you guys didn't know, but down in Orange County, and it's this charter school that they've set up as a very conservative school. They literally play PragerU videos in the classes, right? And they have a waiting list of like 600 kids. It's amazing, but but it's like very small, and they don't have a whole lot of funding, and they're trying to get more on the ground and do more classes and stuff. So, like, in a vacuum, in a sense, like, I think you can have things like this. But if you want to get it to a level that is, you know, like a MAGA movement type of level, I don't see that happening anytime soon, unless it gets co-opted, unless it gets corporatized, unless people come in and say, well, you have to do it this way because I'm the one who's bankrolling you to do it this way. So many good things start out with great intentions until some people come in and say, well, now you have to do it this way. The best creative people in the world usually get ruined by someone saying, I'll give you an art exhibit, and you have to do it exactly this way that I want it to, and it ruins their artistic. It's like all the musicians going into being independent and going to a record label and having their sound get ruined because they want this different type of sound. It's like the same thing. They destroy beautiful things. They destroy things that are unique and novel for the sense of ease and having something that people are used to. And so it's very difficult. I don't know if we can make it into this large type of movement that these other ones have, but what I do know is that there's no fault in being in the minority, right? Like us having differences of opinion than these people, or having separate institutions that might be smaller. I don't think we should count ourselves out for something like that. You know, just because we have smaller amounts of funding or reach or whatever it is, that's fine. Like, so many of the greatest minds in history dealt with being in the minority opinion, and now years and years later are looked at as like heroes of a generation fighting against the massive herd or whatever it was. So I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing, but maybe at the time it is like that.
Yeah, and I think you do see because a lot of these ideas from the mainstream are very stale, like we've talked about. Very talking points that have been beat to death. A whole generation looks at them and says, "This isn't going anywhere. This isn't doing anything for me. This isn't addressing any of my issues." So I think you do see a lot of people from who want to move into positions of influence adopting kind of that mindset, those outside mindsets. And if you have institutions that are preparing them, training scholars, training speakers, training activists, training people in those things, that then when influential people, when elite people want to look for something outside the norm that will actually energize people, they have somewhere to go, right? Because right now the problem is it's still more profitable, it's still a better return on investment to just go with the safe stuff, right? But
Mhm.
if you have but eventually when that stuff just loses all of its passion, when people completely lose faith in it, they don't think it's going anywhere, then having an alternative to go to that is well formed and well spoken and well thought out, I think is crucial for that transition for, for conservatism to become something else or something better.
Yeah, man. I mean, you're 100% right. People need to know that there is something else out there. It's hard to imagine, though, that those safe positions will ever go out of style. I mean, people have been saying, like the leftist Democrat talking points have been exactly the same for decades now. The Republican ones have been exactly the same for decades now. You know, and haven't shifted much. You know, they've both tried to become more cool and hip. And I think about the last 10 years or so, but they've been pretty much the same for so long, that the establishment stays the same, but the normal people, the movements are always changing. So I just hope that with what, what I can try and do, and with what other people can try and do, is let people know that, hey, it's okay to not, have these people always have your back 100%. Like, you don't need the GOP in like the perfect sense to align with everything that you believe in, right? Like, you can put out tweets or Instagram, whatever, or a YouTube video that is different than other people, and it's going to be okay. Like, people need to know that. People need to understand that it's going to be okay for you to have a difference of opinion. I think that the social pressures, especially brought on by social media, are probably the biggest driver for the reason why people do what they do in the first place. The social anxiety of having people think that they're a pariah. And so if people understand that it's okay, like, you can think differently than the establishment that is out there, we can do a lot of good. It's just about making people realize that it's okay.
Yeah, and that is particularly difficult on the right because obviously the
Yeah.
left can have a conversations with its vanguards, right? You can be the most radical, Marxist, racist person on the left, and no one's going to care. Like you can literally say anything you want on the left, and there's pretty much nothing that's going to get you canceled. On the
Right.
right, if you hold the same opinion on same-sex marriage that Barack Obama held in 2008, you can lose your job, right?
Hmm.
Like not in politics, like working at a store. And so
Right.
I think it is, I think you're right that people just often have to have courage, but it is very difficult to send that message to people that like it's okay to step out and have those different opinions when we're not just talking about, oh, you might not get donor funding, like we're talking about
Hmm.
you can't put food
Your
on the table.
livelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, man. That's a really hard thing to do. I mean, how do you instill courage in someone? It's very difficult. I mean, I think that the right's biggest problem, one of their biggest problems, is a lack of role models for people. I mean, look at the role models that people have in this country right now. I mean, it's all the Hollywood actors and the mainstream rappers and these types of people, that are preaching values that are just not good for this country. And when those are the role models of the people in this country, then how do you expect them to have a culture of good values? Like, and the people on the right are not answering back with, you know, cool and talented people that are, for You really have to have cool and talented people. You know, you don't want it to be based on looks and just always sheer talent, but that's how people are attracted to those types of people. And the right, I think, has done a bad job in having good role models for people. I mean, you know, Kevin McCarthy is not going to be a little kid's role model. You know, it's just
Yeah.
not happening. Like the conservative movement needs to get better role models for people to actually wake them up to say, hey, I can be a part of this because it's actually something that is going to make me cool, you know? And that sounds like kind of basic, you know, in a sense, like coolness. But to me, like seeing the
It's
movement, it
crucial.
really is like a big factor. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And some of that will come with just the right naturally now being identified with being transgressive, right? Like everything is progressive, everything, it's everywhere, it's crushing. So like some of that comes, that cachet just comes because you're different and you're just doing something
Hmm.
different. But I think you're right that there's a lot more than that, because if you just stay in the transgressive, then you're not really building anything in the long term worth adopting, right? You're not really building a model, like you said, role models. You're just building up some of that cool cred, but it doesn't go anywhere. It needs to connect to something that people need to be able to see a vision of the future that is better for them and better for their families and better for the communities, connected to the thing you're doing. I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can be cool. Like coolness doesn't just mean like, you know, smoking cigarettes and having sex with a bunch of people and like and being a rapper, you know, or like that. I think the maybe more of the coolness that I'm trying to articulate is someone who is passionate and confident and energetic and someone that people will look up to and say, wow, I like this person because it's someone who I would like to one day maybe potentially emulate. You know, it doesn't have to be like like the coolness that I think that conservatism has tried to grapple with is trying to be like this young movement, and a lot of these people who are trying to make it young don't actually understand what it means to be young, and so then it comes off as bought and sold and not actually cool, you know. But coolness really just comes, like what I'm talking about, is from just being able to articulate points well and be a confident, poignant person.
Oh, sorry, lost you there. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, no, 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 no. You're fine. I For some reason my video ran out for a second. I thought you were still talking. I was like, oh no, did I lose this audio? But you're just done. Uh,
oh
okay, man.
yeah.
Sorry about that. Well, I appreciate it, man. Like I said, I know you had limited time, so I really appreciate you coming on. And guys, like I said, I've got his Twitter and his book linked below. The book is How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies. You can definitely check that out. Go through the link there to find it. Will, I really appreciate you coming on again, man.
Man, this was super cool. It's stuff that I don't always get to talk about. So I'm really into it, man. So thank you for having me on. It's cool that we
Def-
were able to do this.
Definitely, and anytime, man. You just let me know. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we got to get you on my show.
Oh, that would be great. Anytime.
Yeah, man, for sure.
All
Awesome.
right.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Everyone have a good one. I'll talk to you next time.